Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man's Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is James Redstone, and I've spent 18 years walking through the forgotten places in these West Virginia mountains. I'm a park ranger for Monongahela National Forest, but my real job is finding the places people left behind and writing down their stories before they disappear forever. Most folks think being a ranger means rescuing lost hikers or fighting forest fires. For me, it means hiking to old homesteads where families lived 100 years ago, taking pictures of broken-down cabins, and cataloging the rusty tools they left behind. I work with the West Virginia Historical Society, making sure these places get remembered properly. I'm 43 years old, half Cherokee from my grandmother's side, half Irish from my grandfather. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the mountains when I was little. Stories about spirits that lived in the deep places, about children who got lost and never found their way home. I always figured they were just stories. That was before I went to Blackheart Hollow. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in September 1974. Dr. Morrison from the university needed an escort for his archaeological team. They wanted to dig up an old Cherokee settlement that was buried under an abandoned mining town called Blackheart Hollow. I knew the place. Everyone who worked these mountains knew about Blackheart Hollow, even though most of us had never been there. The coal company shut it down in 1934 after the mine caved in and killed 47 children. The families packed up and left within a month. Nobody had lived there since. Why that place? I asked Dr. Morrison over the radio. There are plenty of other Cherokee sites that are easier to get to. The tribe gave us specific permission for this location, he said. They say it's important to document what's there before it's lost forever. I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why the Cherokee wanted that particular spot dug up after leaving it alone for 40 years. The team met me at the ranger station on a cold morning. September in West Virginia is usually warm, but this year felt different. The leaves were already turning, and there was frost on my truck windshield. Dr. Morrison brought 3 people with him. Dr. Sarah Chen, who studied old bones, Dr. Roberts, who knew about Cherokee history, and Tommy Walsh, a graduate student who carried the heavy equipment. We loaded up my truck with their gear shovels, brushes, cameras, and boxes for whatever they found. The drive to Blackheart Hollow would take 3 hours through winding mountain roads. I told them we'd radio back to headquarters every 4 hours, and if anything went wrong, the nearest help was 45 miles away. What kind of things could go wrong? Tommy asked. He was young, maybe 25, and had never been this deep in the mountains. Weather can change fast, I said. Trails can wash out. People get turned around easier than you'd think. I didn't mention the other reason people avoided Blackheart Hollow, how no animals made noise there, how the trees grew twisted and stunted even though the soil was rich, how other rangers said they felt watched when they had to go through the area. As we drove deeper into the mountains, I noticed how quiet it was getting. Usually, you'd hear birds singing, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing. But the closer we got to the hollow, the more the forest seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Chen was looking out the window, taking notes. It's interesting how the vegetation changes, she said. The trees look sick. She was right. The oak and maple trees that should have been tall and healthy looked stunted, their bark gray and peeling. Even the grass looked wrong, too pale, like it wasn't getting enough sunlight even in the open spaces. Probably something in the soil from the old mine, I said, but I didn't really believe it. I'd seen plenty of abandoned mining areas, and they didn't feel like this. When we finally reached Blackheart Hollow, I parked the truck at the edge of what used to be the main street. You could still see the outline of the town foundations where houses used to be, the skeleton of the old company store, rusted metal pieces that might have been playground equipment. The mine entrance was boarded up with new lumber, not the old rotting wood you'd expect after 40 years. Someone had been maintaining it. Who's been keeping up the mine? Dr. Roberts asked. State probably, I said, but I made a mental note to check on that when we got back. We set up camp in what used to be the town square. The archaeological site was supposed to be underneath the old church foundation, about 50 yards from where the mine entrance sat like a dark mouth in the hillside. As the team unpacked their equipment, I walked around the area, looking for anything unusual. That's when I found the first set of footprints. They were small, like a child's bare feet pressed into the mud near the old well. The strange thing was, it hadn't rained in 3 days. The mud should have been dry and cracked, but these prints looked fresh, like someone had walked through just hours before. I called Dr. Morrison over. "You see anything odd about these?" He looked at the prints and frowned. "Children's feet. But we're 20 miles from the nearest road. How would kids get all the way out here?" I didn't have an answer for that. But as I looked at those small footprints pointing toward the boarded-up mine, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Something that had nothing to do with the early September frost. The team started digging the next morning. I made my first radio check to headquarters, everything normal, weather holding steady, team working without problems. But even as I said the words, I knew something was off. Dr. Chen was the first to notice the equipment problems. Her camera kept fogging up, even though the air was dry and cool. When she tried to take pictures of the dig site, the lens would suddenly cloud over with moisture that shouldn't have been there. "Must be a temperature thing," she said, wiping the lens for the 3rd time in an hour. But it wasn't just the camera. Tommy's recording equipment picked up sounds that shouldn't have been there, voices speaking in what Dr. Roberts said was Cherokee, but no one was around to make those sounds. "Play it back," I said. Tommy rewound the tape and hit play. Clear as day, you could hear children's voices talking in a language I didn't understand, but the words sounded sad and lonely. "That's impossible," Tommy said. "We're the only people for miles." Dr. Roberts was pale. "Those voices, they're speaking an old dialect, one that hasn't been used in this area for over a century." I tried to stay practical. Could be picking up radio signals. Sometimes the mountains bounce signals around in weird ways. But even as I said it, I was thinking about my grandmother's stories, about children who got lost in the mountains and couldn't find their way home. The real strangeness started that afternoon. We'd been working for about 4 hours when Dr. Morrison looked at his watch and frowned. "That can't be right," he said. "What's wrong?" I asked. "My watch says it's 2:30, but look at the sun." He pointed up at the sky. "That's where the sun should be, around 5 o'clock. I checked my own watch. 2:30, just like his. But he was right about the sun. We'd somehow lost almost 3 hours without realizing it. "Maybe our watches are broken, Doctor," Chen said, but she sounded worried. That's when Tommy found the toys. He was digging in what should have been the Cherokee layer, about 4 feet down, when his shovel hit something hard. He brushed away the dirt and found a wooden doll, carved and painted in the style of the 1932. "This shouldn't be here," he said. "This layer is supposed to be from the 1800s, maybe earlier." But it wasn't just one toy. As they kept digging, they found marbles, a rusted toy truck, and more dolls. All of them from the mining town era, all of them buried in ground that should have been much older. "It's like someone buried these things recently," Dr. Chen said. That night, Dr. Morrison said he saw children playing at the edge of the dig site. He was sitting by our campfire, updating his notes, when he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. "I turned to look," he told us, "and I swear I saw 3 kids, maybe 8 or 9 years old, playing with toys near the old church foundation. But when I looked directly at them, they weren't there." "Tired eyes," I said. "It happens in the woods. Shadows play tricks on you." But I was thinking about the footprints, about the voices on the recording, about the toys that shouldn't have been where we found them. Dr. Roberts had brought copies of old mining company records, and that night he found something that made us all uncomfortable. In the foreman's journal from 1934, there were entries about children who wouldn't stay buried. "Listen to this," he said, reading by flashlight. "March 15th, 1934. Had to reboard the mine entrance again. Found small handprints on the boards, like children trying to get out, but all the children died in the cave-in last month. Makes no sense." March 22nd. Mrs. Dillard says she heard her daughter Mary Catherine calling from the mine. But Mary Catherine was buried last week. I'm starting to think this place is cursed. April 3rd. The children won't stay buried. I see them playing in the town square at night. They look the same as they did before the accident, but their clothes are covered in coal dust, and their eyes are wrong. We sat around the fire in silence after that. The forest around us was completely quiet, no owls hooting, no insects chirping, no wind in the trees, just the crackling of our fire and the sound of our own breathing. That's when we heard the laughter. It started soft, like children playing somewhere far away, but it was coming from the direction of the mine. The sound echoed off the hills, getting louder and closer, until it felt like it was right at the edge of our campfire light. Tommy grabbed his recording equipment, but when he turned it on, the laughter stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. "We should radio for pickup, Doctor," Chen said. Her voice was shaking. I tried the radio, but all I got was static. "Must be the mountains blocking the signal," I said, but I'd never had trouble reaching headquarters from this area before. "Doctor." Morrison stood up and looked toward the mine. "There's got to be a logical explanation for all this." That's when we saw the light. It was coming from inside the boarded-up mine entrance, a soft yellow glow like candlelight. But there was no way for light to be in there. The mine had been sealed for 40 years. "Someone's in there," Tommy whispered. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the mine. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone in there? This is a restricted area." The light went out immediately, but as I got closer to the mine entrance, I could hear something that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of small feet running on wooden floors, like children playing in an old house. But the mine was carved out of rock and earth. There were no wooden floors down there. And then I heard something that made me stop walking entirely. A child's voice, calling from deep in the mine. "Mister, will you come play with us? We've been waiting so long." I backed away from the mine entrance, my heart pounding. When I turned around, the rest of the team was staring at me with wide eyes. "Did you hear that?" I asked. They all nodded. That night, none of us slept well. We took turns keeping watch, but every time someone dozed off, they had the same dream. Being buried alive, dirt filling their mouth and nose, unable to breathe or scream. And through it all, we could hear children laughing somewhere in the darkness. Morning brought no relief. Dr. Morrison was gone. I found his sleeping bag empty, his boots still by the fire, his clothes folded neatly as if he'd just stepped out for a moment, but there was no sign of where he'd gone. "He must have walked off to relieve himself," Dr. Chen said, but her voice was tight with worry. "We searched for 2 hours before we found him. He was 30 feet up in an old oak tree, sitting on a branch like he'd climbed up there in his sleep. But when we got him down, something was wrong with him." Dr. Morrison looked like he'd aged 20 years overnight. His hair had gone completely gray, his face was lined with deep wrinkles, and his hands shook like an old man's. "I don't remember anything," he kept saying. "I was sleeping, and then I was in the tree. But I feel so tired, so very tired." We got him back to camp and tried the radio again. Still nothing but static. That's when Dr. Chen made the discovery that changed everything. She'd been working on the dig site while we searched for Morrison, and she'd uncovered something that shouldn't have been there. It was a hidden chamber, about 6 feet square, carved into the bedrock beneath the Cherokee layer. Inside were 12 small bodies, perfectly preserved, arranged in traditional Cherokee burial poses. But these weren't ancient remains. The bodies looked like they'd been placed there recently, even though the chamber had been sealed with stones that must have weighed hundreds of pounds. "This is impossible, Doctor," Chen whispered. "These children, they're wearing clothes from the 1932, but they look like they died yesterday." I looked into the chamber and felt sick. 12 children, all around, 8 or 9 years old, lying peacefully with their hands folded over their chests, but their skin was pale as moonlight, and there was coal dust around their eyes and mouths. Dr. Roberts was reading from a book of Cherokee history he'd brought. According to this, there were stories about children being sacrificed to mountain spirits during times of great need, usually during droughts or famines. "You think the tribe sacrificed these kids?" I asked. "Not the tribe as a whole," he said, "but maybe some individuals, desperate enough to try anything. And if the mining company built their town on top of a Cherokee burial ground, especially one with that kind of dark history." He didn't finish the sentence, but we all understood. The mine disaster wasn't an accident. It was payback. That afternoon, I saw my first hollow child. I was checking the perimeter of our camp when I noticed a figure standing near the mine entrance. It was a little girl, maybe 9 years old, wearing a faded blue dress that might have been pretty once. Her hair was long and brown, but it was tangled and dirty, like she'd been playing in the dirt. She was looking right at me. "Hey there," I called out, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Are you lost? Where are your parents?" The girl tilted her head, and I could see that her eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye, like they'd been filled with coal dust. "Why won't you play with us, mister?" she asked. Her voice carried clearly across the distance, but it sounded hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I blinked, and she was gone. When I told the others, Tommy laughed nervously. "Stress hallucination. It happens in situations like this." But an hour later, Dr. Roberts saw 3 children playing Ring Around the Rosie near the old church foundation. When he called to them, they all turned to look at him at the same time, and they all had those same black, hollow eyes. "They fell down," he said, his voice shaking. "They were singing Ring Around the Rosie, and when they got to We All Fall Down, they just collapsed. Like they were dead. But then they got up and started singing again." That night, things got worse. Tommy was on watch duty when the children came for Dr. Chen. He said he saw them approaching our camp, not walking, but sort of gliding along the ground like they were floating just above the dirt. There were dozens of them, all children, all wearing clothes from the 1932nd. Some looked normal, except for their black eyes, but others were wrong. Some had coal dust covering their faces like masks. Others looked like they'd been crushed or buried alive. They surrounded Dr. Chen's sleeping bag and just stood there, staring down at her. Tommy tried to wake her up, but she wouldn't respond. She was breathing, but her breath was coming out as white vapor, like it was freezing cold even though the night was warm. Then the children started singing. Asterisk, London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. Asterisk, asterisk, London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. Asterisk, but they were singing it in that hollow, echoing voice, and the melody was wrong, slower and sadder than it should have been. Tommy shook Dr. Chen harder, and finally her eyes opened. But when she looked at him, her face was different. Younger. Like she was becoming a child herself. "Do you want to play?" she asked in a little girl's voice. "We know such fun games." That snapped me awake. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it at the circle of children around our camp. They didn't run away like normal kids would have. They just turned to look at me, all those black eyes reflecting my light like mirrors. "Leave her alone," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. The little girl in the blue dress, the one I'd seen by the mine, stepped forward. "We've been so lonely, mister. 40 years we've been waiting for someone to play with us. We just want friends. Go back to where you came from," I said. She tilted her head again, and when she smiled, I could see that her teeth were black too, like they'd been stained with coal dust. "We can't go back," she said. "We died here. This is where we live now. But it's so lonely being dead. We want Dr. Chen to stay with us. We want all of you to stay." I reached for Dr. Chen, but when I touched her hand, it was ice cold. Her fingernails were turning black, and her hair was starting to lose its color. "She's changing," Tommy whispered. The children started singing again, but this time it was a different song. Asterisk. Ring around the mountain, pocket full of coal. Asterisk, asterisk, ashes, ashes, we all lose our souls. Asterisk. As they sang, Dr. Chen kept getting younger. Her face smoothed out, her adult clothes started hanging loose on her shrinking frame, and her eyes were starting to turn black. I did the only thing I could think of. I remembered something my Cherokee grandmother had taught me when I was little, a protection song she said would keep bad spirits away. I started singing it, the words coming back to me from deep in my childhood memory. It was in Cherokee, words I barely understood, but I could feel the power in them. The children stopped singing immediately. They stepped back from Dr. Chen, and the little girl in the blue dress hissed like an angry cat. "That's not fair," she said. "Those are the old words, the ones that bind us." "Then go back to your rest," I said, still singing the protection song. "We can't rest," another child said. This one was a boy with a crushed skull, coal dust still clinging to his broken scalp. "We died too young. We died scared and angry and alone. The mountain holds us here until we find peace." And we can only find peace if others join us, the little girl added. Living children to play with us forever. They started to fade as I kept singing, but before they disappeared completely, the little girl pointed at me with one coal-stained finger. We'll be back, mister. We have all the time in the world. And you can't sing forever. When they were gone, Dr. Chen collapsed. She was breathing, but barely. Her hair had turned completely white, and her face was lined with wrinkles. Like Dr. Morrison, she'd aged decades in minutes. But she was still alive. Tommy was shaking. What the hell is happening here? I looked toward the mine entrance, where I could see that soft yellow light glowing again. We're dealing with something that should have been put to rest 40 years ago, I said, and it's getting stronger. By dawn, Dr. Roberts was gone too. We found him at the bottom of the sealed mine shaft, 40 feet down in a space that should have been filled with rock and debris. But somehow the shaft was clear, and Roberts was lying at the bottom, clutching a toy train made of rusted metal. Like the others, he'd aged rapidly, but Roberts had aged to death. His body looked like a 90-year-old man, dried up and withered. But the strangest thing was his face. He was smiling, like he'd died happy. We have to get out of here, Tommy said. He was the only team member left who wasn't affected, and he was barely holding it together. I tried the radio again, but this time I got something worse than static. I got children's voices singing nursery rhymes, their hollow echoes filling the radio speaker. London Bridge is falling down. They sang, falling down, falling down. I threw the radio into the fire. That's when they all appeared at once, 47 children, standing in a circle around our camp. Some looked normal, except for their black eyes. Others showed the signs of how they'd died, crushed by falling rocks, suffocated by coal dust, broken and twisted from the mine collapse. At the front of the group was the little girl in the blue dress. But now I could see her clearly, and I recognized her from the mining company records. "You're Mary Catherine Dillard," I said. She smiled, and her black teeth gleamed. "Very good, mister. I was 12 when the mountain fell on us. I've been 12 for 40 years now." "What do you want?" "We want what all children want," she said. "We want to play. We want friends. We want someone to take care of us." Behind her, the other children started moving closer. I could see Tommy aging in real time as they approached, his hair going gray, lines appearing on his young face. "We've been so alone," Mary Catherine continued. "The grown-ups all ran away after we died. They left us here in the dark, scared and cold and forgotten. But you came back. You and your friends came to visit us." "We didn't know you were here," I said. "Oh, but we called to you," she said. "We've been calling for 40 years, waiting for someone brave enough to come play with us. Dr. Morrison heard us. He came down into the mine to see us, and we made him young again. He's 8 years old now, and he's so happy." She gestured toward the mine entrance, where I could see a faint glow. "Dr. Roberts wanted to learn about Cherokee history, so we taught him our songs. The old songs from before the white men came. He sang with us until he forgot how to be grown up." I looked at Tommy. He was hunched over like an old man now, his face wrinkled and spotted with age. "And Dr. Chen," Mary Catherine went on, "she's going to be our teacher. We never had a proper teacher in our town. She's going to teach us all the things we never got to learn because we died too young." "Let them go," I said. "They didn't do anything wrong." Mary Catherine's smile disappeared. "Nobody leaves, mister. Not until we're all together. Not until we have enough friends to play with forever." "I know the old songs," I said. "The Cherokee protection songs. I can send you back to your rest." "The Cherokee songs only work if we want to rest," she said. "But we don't want to rest, we want to play." That's when I understood. The Cherokee burial chamber beneath the town wasn't a normal burial. Those 12 children had been sacrificed to become guardian spirits, protectors of the mountain. But when the mining company came and dug into the mountain, when they built their town on top of the sacred burial ground, they corrupted the guardian spirits. The 12 Cherokee children had become something hungry and angry, and when the mine collapsed and killed 47 more children, they'd absorbed all that death and trauma and loneliness. Now they were 47 children strong, and they'd been waiting 40 years for someone to join their eternal playground. "You can be our teacher too," Mary Catherine said. "You know the old songs. You can teach us Cherokee games." The circle of children was closing in. Tommy collapsed, aged to death like Dr. Roberts, but still breathing barely. In just minutes, he'd be gone. I had one chance. I reached into my pack and pulled out the emergency flares I always carried. If the children were bound to this place by trauma, maybe I could disrupt their connection. Maybe I could force them to remember their actual deaths, not the eternal playground they'd created to escape from it. "You want to play games?" I said. "Let's play hide and seek." I lit the first flare and threw it toward the mine entrance. The red light illuminated the boarded-up entrance, and for a moment, I could see through the boards. Inside the mine, there were dozens of children sitting in a circle, holding hands, singing in voices that echoed like they were coming from the bottom of a well. Dr. Morrison was there, but he looked like a little boy now. Dr. Chen was there too, young and smiling, her adult memories completely gone. "You're not playing, mister," Mary Catherine said. "You're supposed to close your eyes and count." I lit the second flare and threw it at the old church foundation. The light revealed something that made the children scream not in anger, but in memory. Under the foundation were bones. The bones of the 12 Cherokee children who'd been sacrificed over a century ago. Their skeletons were arranged in a circle, hands linked, just like the children in the mine. "Remember," I shouted. "Remember how you really died." The light from the flares was revealing the truth the children had been hiding from themselves. They'd created this eternal playground to escape the memory of their deaths, but the memory was still there, waiting. Mary Catherine's face changed. The coal dust around her eyes wasn't decorative, it was real. She was remembering being buried alive, remembering the moment the mine roof collapsed and crushed her beneath tons of rock and dirt. "No," she whispered. "We don't want to remember, we want to play." But the other children were remembering too. One by one, they stopped looking like happy children and started looking like what they really were, victims of a mining disaster, crushed and broken and terrified. I lit my last flare and threw it at my own feet. "Hide and seek is over," I said. "Game time is done. You've been hiding from the truth for 40 years, but you can't hide anymore." The children were screaming now, but not the angry screams of hungry spirits. These were the screams of 47 children who died scared and alone, who'd been hiding from their own deaths for 40 years. "We don't want to be dead," Mary Catherine cried, and now she sounded like a real 12-year-old girl instead of a monster. "We want our mommies. We want to go home." "You can go home," I said. "But first you have to let my friends go." Mary Catherine looked toward the mine, where the glow was getting brighter. "But if we let them go, we'll be alone again. We'll be dead again." "You were never alone," I said. "All 47 of you died together. You've been together all along. You don't need to steal other people's lives." The children looked at each other, and for the first time in 40 years, they really saw each other. Not as playmates in an eternal game, but as fellow victims of the same tragedy. One by one, they started walking toward the mine, but this time they weren't gliding or floating. They were walking like normal children, scared children going home after a long day of playing. Mary Catherine was the last to go. She turned back to look at me, and her eyes weren't black anymore. They were brown, like a normal little girl's. "Will you remember us, mister?" she asked. "Will you tell people we were here?" "I'll remember," I said. She smiled, a real smile this time, not the hollow grin of a hungry spirit. "Thank you for teaching us how to stop playing," she said. Then she walked into the mine, and the glow faded away. I managed to get Tommy out of the hollow, but he died 2 days later in the hospital. The doctors said it was the strangest case they'd ever seen, a 25-year-old man who died of old age. Dr. Morrison and Dr. Chen were found in the mine when the state search and rescue team finally made it up there. They were alive, but their minds were gone. Morrison kept asking for his mommy and wanting to play with toy cars. Dr. Chen could only speak in words a child would know. The official report said it was a gas leak. Natural methane buildup in the old mine caused hallucinations and disorientation. The site was sealed permanently for geological instability, and no one was allowed back into Blackheart Hollow. I retired the day after I got out of the hospital, 43 years old, and I couldn't handle being a ranger anymore. I moved to Florida, as far from mountains as I could get. For months afterward, I couldn't be around children without having panic attacks. The sound of kids laughing on playgrounds made me break out in a cold sweat. But their children didn't forget about me. I started getting letters about a month after I moved to Florida. They were written in a child's handwriting, with crayons and colored pencils. The return address always said Blackheart Hollow, West Virginia. The first one just said, "Dear Mr. Redstone, thank you for helping us remember. We're not scared anymore. Your friend, Mary Catherine." The letters kept coming. Sometimes they were from Mary Catherine, sometimes from other children. They always said the same thing, that they weren't scared anymore, that they'd found their way home, that they remembered their families now. But then the letters started asking questions. "When are you coming back to play? We miss you, Mr. Redstone. The mountain is lonely without visitors." I threw the letters away, but they kept coming. The handwriting got more urgent, more desperate. "Please come back. We need a grown-up to take care of us. We're still here, Mr. Redstone. We're always here." I realized that helping them remember their deaths hadn't set them free. It had just made them more aware of being dead. They were still trapped in Blackheart Hollow, but now they knew exactly what they'd lost. The last letter I got was different. It was written in an adult's handwriting, and it was signed by Dr. Morrison. "James," it said, "I remember everything now. I remember being an adult, being a professor, having a wife and children of my own, but I can't leave this place. None of us can. The mountain holds us here, and it's holding the other children too. They need someone to take care of them, someone to help them understand what happened. They want you to come back. They say you're the only one who listened to them, the only one who treated them like real children instead of monsters. Please come back, James. We need you." I burned that letter and never opened another one. But I started researching other mining disasters in Appalachian towns. What I found kept me awake at night. Centralia, Pennsylvania, Monongah, West Virginia, Cherry, Illinois. Dozens of mining towns where children had died in accidents, and dozens of stories about places that people avoided afterward. Stories about children's voices in abandoned mines. Stories about families who moved away and never came back. I think there are children trapped in all those places, waiting for someone to play with them, waiting for someone to remember them. I'm telling you this story because I want you to know what's out there in the forgotten places. I want you to know that some places hold on to their dead, especially the ones who died young and scared and alone. And I want you to know that if you ever find yourself in a place where the animals don't make noise, where the trees grow wrong, where you hear children laughing in the distance, you should turn around and leave. Because the Hollow children are still out there. In Blackheart Hollow and places like it, they're still waiting for someone to play with them forever. And once you start playing their games, you can never stop. My name is Rebecca Ashford, and I've treated more snake bites than any ranger in Virginia. I never believed serpents could be vessels for something evil. For 12 years, I've worked the Jefferson National Forest, mostly around Mount Rogers. Before this job, I was a nurse for 8 years. Blood, broken bones, medical emergencies, AGS, none of it bothered me. But snakes? They were just animals doing what animals do. Bite someone, inject venom, move on. Simple biology. The mountain communities up here are different from anywhere else. Isolated, religious in ways that might seem strange to outsiders. Some of the Pentecostal churches practice snake handling during worship. They believe if you have enough faith, the serpents won't hurt you. I've patched up plenty of folks who learned their faith wasn't quite strong enough. Most rangers avoid those calls. Not me. I understand the medical side of snake bites better than anyone in the Forest Service. Copperheads, timber rattlers, even the occasional cottonmouth that wandered up from the lowlands, I know their venom. How it spreads. What anti-venom works best. The church folks trust me because I don't lecture them about their beliefs. I just fix what needs fixing. That August was brutal hot. The kind of heat that makes everything cranky. People, animals, especially snakes. We'd gotten more bite calls in 3 weeks than we usually see all summer. The serpents were aggressive, more active during daylight hours than normal. Even the wildlife seemed nervous. Deer moving in broad daylight. Birds quiet in the morning. Like something had them spooked. I should have paid attention to those signs. The call came in on a Tuesday evening, just as I was heading home. Radio crackled with static from the storm building over the mountains. "Rebecca, you there?" It was dispatch, Jane's voice tight with something I couldn't place. "Copy, what have you got?" "Emergency, At Holiness Church of the Serpent, multiple casualties. They're asking for you specifically. I knew that church. Tiny congregation, maybe 20 families, way up a dirt road that barely qualified as a path. Led by preacher Samuel Collins, a man in his 70s who'd been handling snakes since he was 14. If he was calling for help, something was seriously wrong. How many casualties? I asked, already turning my truck around. They won't say exactly, just keep asking for you to hurry. Said it's a spiritual emergency. Spiritual emergency. That was a new one. In my experience, snake bites were medical emergencies, period. Faith might help with healing, but antivenom worked a lot faster than prayer. The drive up to Holiness Church took 45 minutes on winding mountain roads. Storm clouds gathered overhead, making the forest darker than it should be for 7 in the evening. My headlights caught eyes reflecting back from the tree line. More animals than usual, all watching the road. I'd been to this church maybe 6 times over the years. Always for snake bites, always straightforward. Preacher Collins ran a careful operation. He knew which serpents were more dangerous, kept medical supplies on hand, had someone trained in first aid present during services. His congregation might court danger, but they weren't stupid about it. The church sat in a clearing, surrounded by ancient oaks and pines. White clapboard building with a simple cross on top, no steeple, nothing fancy. But as I pulled up, something felt wrong immediately. Cars were parked at odd angles, like people had gotten out in a hurry. The front door stood wide open, yellow light spilling out. I could hear voices inside, not singing or praying, but something that sounded like arguing, maybe crying. I grabbed my medical kit and headed for the door. The closer I got, the stranger things felt. The air smelled different, not just hot and humid from the approaching storm, but something else. Something that reminded me of the reptile house at the zoo, musty, ancient, like things that lived in dark places. The threshold, I stopped. The sanctuary looked normal enough. Wooden pews, simple altar, American flag in the corner. But the people. Something was wrong with the people. About 15 congregation members sat or stood around the room. None of them looked at me when I entered. They kept their eyes down or stared at spots on the wall. Several had bandages on their hands and arms, fresh ones, still spotted with blood. But that wasn't what made my skin crawl. It was how still they were. How quiet. These were mountain folks who'd known me for years. They should have been calling out, asking for help, telling me what happened all at once like they usually did. Instead, they just watched. Waited. "Preacher Collins?" I called out. He emerged from a back room, moving slowly. Samuel Collins had always been a strong man despite his age, worked construction before he got the calling, hands like leather from years of labor. But now he looked old, really old, and scared. "Rebecca," he said, and his voice cracked like he'd been screaming. "Thank God you came. We need help, we need." He stopped, looking around at his congregation. They were all watching him now, and something passed between them, some kind of understanding I wasn't part of. "What happened here?" I asked, setting down my kit. "How many bites? What kind of snakes?" "That's just it," Collins whispered, stepping closer to me. "We don't rightly know what kind they were." Before I could ask what he meant, a woman in the front pew started shaking. Not like she was crying or upset, like she was having some kind of seizure, but her eyes stayed focused, locked on mine. "Mrs. Patterson?" I moved toward her, pulling out my stethoscope. "What are you feeling? When were you bitten?" She opened her mouth to answer, and I heard something that stopped me cold. A sound came out, but it wasn't words. It was a hiss. Long, low, and absolutely not human. Mrs. Patterson's eyes went wide with terror. She clapped her hands over her mouth, but the sound kept coming, like something inside her was trying to speak. "When did this start?" I asked Collins, not taking my eyes off the woman. "About 2 hours ago. During evening service, we were handling as usual. 4 copperheads and 2 timber rattlers. Same serpents we've worked with for months. Docile as house cats, most of them." Mrs. Patterson's shaking got worse. I reached for her wrist to check her pulse, and she jerked back like I'd burned her. For just a second, I could have sworn her eyes weren't quite right. The pupils looked different, not round like they should be. "But something changed," Collins continued. "The serpents got agitated all at once, started moving in ways I've never seen, like they were. Coordinated. Working together. Snakes don't work together, I said automatically. They're solitary hunters. That's what I thought too. Another congregation member, a young man named David, suddenly stood up from a middle pew. His left hand was wrapped in bloody cloth, and he was staring at something I couldn't see. "David?" Collins called. "You feeling all right, son?" David turned toward us, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. His skin had a strange sheen to it, almost like scales catching light. When he spoke, his voice sounded thick, wrong. "They're still here," he said. "In the walls, in the floor, they're waiting." "Who's waiting?" I asked. David's head tilted to one side, too far to one side. "The old ones. The first ones. They remember when humans knew their place." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the storm outside. This wasn't shock from a snake bite. This wasn't even normal delirium from venom. This was something else entirely. "I need to examine everyone who was bitten," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Starting with you, David." He smiled, and I saw his teeth. They looked sharper than they should. Not filed or modified, but naturally pointed. Like they'd grown that way. "You can try," he said. I approached him slowly, the way I'd learned to approach injured animals. Non-threatening but confident. But, as I got closer, David's head turned to track my movement in a way that made my stomach clench. Smooth, fluid, like a snake following potential prey. "Give me your hand," I said. "I need to see the bite." He held out his left hand, unwrapping the bloody cloth. Underneath were 2 puncture wounds, but they were wrong. Too deep, too far apart. And around them, his skin wasn't swollen like it should be with a venomous bite. Instead, it looked different. Harder. More textured. I'd treated hundreds of snake bites. I knew what they looked like at every stage of envenomation. This wasn't that. "What kind of snake did this?" I asked. "Big one," David said. "Real big, with a voice like thunder." Snakes don't have voices. They can't vocalize beyond hissing. But before I could say that, I heard something that made every hair on my body stand up. From somewhere in the walls came a sound like wooden boards creaking, but rhythmic, deliberate. Like something large was moving through the spaces between the walls. The entire congregation went dead silent. "What was that?" I whispered. Preacher Collins looked at me with eyes full of fear and something else. Guilt, maybe. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something about this church, about how it was founded, about what we might have woken up." The creaking sound came again, closer this time, and with it I heard something impossible. A voice, low and sibilant, speaking words I couldn't quite make out but somehow understood. Asterisk, "Welcome, healer. We have been waiting for you." Asterisk, I spun around, looking for the source. But there was no one else in the church. Just the congregation, all of them staring at me now with expressions I couldn't read. "Who said that?" I demanded. Mrs. Patterson stood up slowly. The shaking had stopped, but now she moved with an unnatural grace. Too smooth, too controlled. "No one said anything," she replied, but her voice had changed. Deeper, with an odd echo to it. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. None of them were breathing normally. Their chests rose and fell too slowly, like they were conserving oxygen. Like reptiles do. "I need to call this in," I said, reaching for my radio. "No signal up here during storms," Collins said. "You know that." He was right. The mountain blocked radio signals even on good days, but I had to try. I keyed the radio, got nothing but static. David laughed, and the sound was wrong. Too long, with an odd hissing quality at the end. "She's starting to understand," he said to the others. "Good, that will make things easier." "Make what easier?" I asked. The lights flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. In the darkness, I heard sounds that snakes definitely shouldn't make. Whispers, conversations, and something that might have been laughter. When the emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, I saw them clearly for the first time. Their eyes, all of them. Vertical pupils. Every single person in that church had vertical pupils like a snake, and they were all looking at me. I backed toward the door, but David moved to block my path. Not quickly, not obviously, but with that same fluid motion I'd noticed before, like he was gliding instead of walking. "Where are you going, Rebecca?" he asked. "We need your help." "With what?" Mrs. Patterson stepped forward. In the emergency lighting, her skin definitely looked wrong. Scaled, reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at. "With understanding," she said in that too deep voice. "With accepting what we're becoming." "What you're becoming?" I clutched my medical kit tighter. "Look, everyone needs to get to a hospital, right now. You're all showing signs of severe envenomation, possibly with hallucinogenic properties. We need antivenoms, blood work, IV fluids, blood work." Collins laughed, and it sounded like dry leaves rustling. "What do you think they'd find in our blood, Rebecca?" Before I could answer, something dropped from the ceiling onto my shoulder. I looked down and saw a snake. Not a big one, maybe 2 feet long, dark brown with lighter patterns. Could have been a juvenile copperhead, except for 2 things. First, it wasn't trying to bite me or escape. It was just sitting there, watching me with bright, intelligent eyes. Second, it spoke. "Hello, Rebecca," it said in a voice like wind through leaves. "We've been waiting to meet you." I screamed and brushed it off my shoulder. The snake hit the floor and immediately coiled, but didn't strike. Just kept watching me with those 2 bright eyes. "Impossible," I gasped. "Snakes can't talk. They don't have vocal cords. They can't." "Many things are impossible," the snake said. "Until they aren't." More snakes began emerging from cracks in the walls, gaps in the floorboards, spaces around the windows, dozens of them. All different species, some I didn't recognize. And they were all wrong, too big, wrong colors, moving in coordinated patterns that made my skin crawl. But the worst part was the sounds they made, not hissing, talking, whispering to each other in voices that sounded almost human. "What is this?" I demanded, looking around at the congregation. "What's happening here?" Preacher Collins stepped forward, and I saw that his skin had changed too. Definitely scaled now, with patterns that shifted in the flickering light. 67 years ago, he said, my grandfather founded this church after a vision. A great serpent came to him in the mountains, told him that humans had forgotten their true place in creation, that we were meant to serve, not rule. A large snake, easily 6 feet long, slithered down the wall behind the altar. This one was massive, thick as my arm, with markings I'd never seen before. "Your grandfather made a deal," I said, understanding flooding through me. "Didn't he?" "He thought he was chosen by God," Collins replied. "But the serpent that spoke to him was much older than any god humans worship. It had been sleeping in these mountains for thousands of years, waiting for the right time to wake up." The large snake reached the floor and began moving toward me. Not attacking, not threatening, just approaching. Like it wanted to get a better look. The Cherokee knew. Collins continued. They had rituals to keep it sleeping. But when the white settlers came, when they built farms and churches and roads, the old barriers got broken. "And now it's awake," I said. "Now it's awake," he agreed. "And it's decided humanity has had long enough to prove we deserve dominion over the earth." The big snake stopped about 3 feet from me. When it spoke, the voice was deeper than the others, ancient beyond measure. "You heal the wounded," it said. "You understand the body, how it works, how it changes. This interests us." "Us? I am the first, but not the only. There are others like me sleeping in sacred places around the world. As humanity grows more destructive, more arrogant, we are awakening." I looked around the church. The congregation members were changing more obviously now, their skin clearly scaled, their movements becoming more serpentine. But their eyes still held human awareness. Human terror. They're still conscious, I realized. They know what's happening to them. "Of course," the great serpent said. "What would be the point otherwise? They are becoming something better, something that understands its place." Mrs. Patterson tried to speak, but only hissing came out now. Tears ran down her scaled cheeks as she gestured helplessly at her throat. "You're torturing them," I said. "We are evolving them, as we will evolve all humanity in time. But the process requires certain catalysts. Medical knowledge, understanding of human physiology. The truth hit me like a physical blow. You need me to help you. You understand how the human body works better than anyone in these mountains. With your knowledge, we can perfect the transformation, make it faster, more complete, less painful for the subjects. David stepped closer, and I could see scales covering most of his face now. When he opened his mouth, his tongue was forked. "Help them," he hissed, but his eyes were pleading. "Please, make it stop hurting." I looked around at all of them. 15 people I'd known for years, trapped in their own bodies, while something ancient and hungry wore their flesh like clothing. They were still human enough to suffer, but not human enough to escape. And if I refuse? The great serpent's laugh was like wind through a graveyard. Then they will remain as they are, conscious, aware, feeling every moment of their transformation. And when we are finished with this place, we will move to the next church, the next community, the next group of humans who thought they could handle forces beyond their understanding. Thunder crashed outside, and the emergency lights flickered again. In the strobing illumination, I saw more shapes moving in the shadows. Larger shapes. Things that might once have been human, but were now something else entirely. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. "Until dawn," the serpent replied. "When the sun rises, this phase of their transformation will be complete. After that, they will no longer need your help. They will no longer be human enough to save." I looked at my watch. 11:30 p.m. 7 hours until sunrise. 7 hours to figure out how to fight something that had been ancient when my ancestors were still learning to use fire. The serpent seemed to read my thoughts. "There is no fighting us, healer. There is only acceptance. Help us, and your species might survive in some form. Refuse, and you will simply be the last to understand what you truly are." What we truly are. The great serpent's eyes fixed on mine, and for a moment I felt like I was falling into something vast and dark and infinitely patient. "Pray," it whispered. I had to get out of there. Think. Find help. But as I moved toward the door again, David grabbed my arm with fingers that were too long, too flexible. "Don't leave us," he begged, his voice barely human now. "Please. We can feel ourselves disappearing." Mrs. Patterson nodded frantically, tears still streaming down her scaled face. She pointed to her throat, then to me, then made a gesture like cutting. She wanted me to end it, to put her out of her misery. But I couldn't. I'm a healer, not a killer. There had to be another way. "Let me examine them," I told the great serpent, "all of them. If you want my help, I need to understand exactly what you're doing to them." The ancient creature considered this. "Very well. But remember, dawn approaches. Choose wisely." I opened my medical kit and started with David since he was closest. His pulse was slow, too slow. When I checked his blood pressure, the numbers made no sense. His body temperature had dropped to 89 degrees, 200 enough, cold enough to kill a human, but he seemed fine. "The transformation changes everything," he whispered as I worked. "Metabolism, circulation, nervous system, we don't need the same things anymore." I moved to Mrs. Patterson next. Her transformation was further along. The scales were hardening into plates, and her spine seemed to be changing shape. But worst of all, when I looked in her eyes, I could see her humanity fading. Not gone yet, but dimming like a candle, burning down. As I examined the others, a pattern emerged. The changes weren't random. They were systematic, methodical. Someone, or something, with deep knowledge of biology was orchestrating this. "You've done this before," I said to the great serpent, "many times, across many centuries, but never with someone of your medical knowledge helping us refine the process." That's when it hit me. The creature didn't just want my help making the transformation easier. It wanted to learn from me, use my knowledge to perfect the process for when it spread to other communities. I was the key to turning this isolated incident into a plague. "The others," I said, "the ones you mentioned sleeping around the world, they're all waiting for you to perfect this, aren't they?" The serpent's silence was answer enough. I looked around the church again, this time with different eyes, not just seeing the victims, but the setup, the positioning, the way the snakes had emerged from specific points in the walls. "This isn't random either," I realized. "You planned this, chose this church specifically." "The foundation," Preacher Collins managed to say, his voice slurred but still barely human. Tell her about the foundation. The great serpent hissed in what might have been annoyance, but Collins continued. When my grandfather built this church, he had to dig deep for the foundation. Found something buried there. Something the Cherokee had wrapped in leather and stone and bound with symbols he didn't recognize. The binding, I breathed. He broke your prison. Not broke, the serpent corrected. Weakened. It took decades for me to gather enough strength to affect the physical world. This congregation's faith, their willingness to handle serpents, their belief in supernatural power. It fed me. Made me stronger. I thought about what I knew of Cherokee traditions. They were careful people, respectful of forces they didn't fully understand. If they had gone to the trouble of binding something and burying it deep, they'd had good reason. There might be a way to put you back, I said. Every snake in the room went still. The congregation members, who could still move, turned to stare at me with expressions of desperate hope. The Cherokee rituals, I continued. If they bound you once, the Cherokee are gone from these mountains, the serpent said. But I heard uncertainty in its voice for the first time. Their knowledge died with them. Not all of it. I was thinking of Joe Crow Feather, an elderly Cherokee man who lived about 20 miles south. He ran a small museum and cultural center, taught traditional crafts to tourists. But I'd heard rumors he knew more than he shared publicly. Old knowledge. Dangerous knowledge. The problem was getting to him. And convincing him to help, and doing it all before dawn. Even if such knowledge existed, the serpent said, the ritual would require sacrifice. Are you prepared to die for these people, healer? I looked around at the congregation again, people I'd known for years, trapped in nightmare transformations. Mrs. Patterson caught my eye and nodded slightly, understanding passing between us. They were dying anyway. The only question was whether their deaths would mean something. Maybe, I said. But first, I want to make you an offer. The great serpent coiled tighter, interested despite itself. Take me instead, I said. Leave them alone, and I'll help you willingly. Think about it. A doctor who understands modern medicine, human physiology, even basic biochemistry. I'd be a much more valuable ally than a bunch of mountain folk. The congregation started making sounds of protest, but I held up my hand. I'm serious, I continued. They can't give you what I can. But I need proof. You'll honor the deal. Reverse their transformations first. Impossible. The process cannot be undone. Then slow it down. Stop it where it is. Prove you have that kind of control. The serpent studied me for a long moment. Around the church, the smaller snakes began whispering to each other in that unsettling chorus. You would sacrifice yourself for them? If necessary. Even knowing you would remain conscious throughout your transformation. That you would watch yourself become something other than human? I thought about Mrs. Patterson's tears. David's desperate pleas. Yes. The great serpent was quiet for so long I began to think it had rejected my offer. Then, slowly, it began to laugh. The sound filled the church, echoing off the walls like the voice of the mountain itself. Acceptable, it said finally. But the ritual begins now, and if you attempt to deceive us, I understand. What I didn't say was that I was already deceiving them. Because while I'd been examining the congregation, I'd also been palming supplies from my medical kit. Specific supplies. A scalpel, antiseptic, and a syringe filled with the most potent anticoagulant I carried. If the Cherokee had bound this thing once using blood and sacrifice, maybe that was still the key. Maybe it just needed to be the right blood. The blood of someone who understood exactly what they were giving up. The great serpent moved closer, its massive head now just inches from mine. Place your hand on the altar, it commanded. The binding ritual begins with blood freely given. I walked to the front of the church, aware that every eye, human and serpent, was following my movement. The altar was simple, white-painted wood, but I could see dark stains on its surface. Old stains that looked suspiciously like blood. Your grandfather, I said to Collins. This is where he made his deal, isn't it? Collins nodded weakly. Cut his palm, let the blood drip onto the wood. Said he felt something wake up in the mountain that very moment. I placed my left hand on the altar. I then pulled out the scalpel with my right. The cut had to be real. The creature would sense deception. But I palmed the syringe of anticoagulant as I made the shallow slice across my palm. Blood began to drip onto the altar, and immediately I felt something change in the air. A presence, vast and ancient, pressing against my mind. Asterisk. Yes, asterisk. The serpent's voice echoed inside my skull. Asterisk. Now you begin to understand. The power that flows through all living things. The connection between predator and prey. Asterisk. The sensation was overwhelming. Like every nerve in my body was connected to something infinitely larger than myself. I could feel the mountain around us, the creatures sleeping in its depths, the network of life that stretched across continents. But I could also feel the congregation. Their pain, their fear, their desperate hope that someone would save them. While the serpent was distracted by the blood ritual, I quickly injected the anticoagulant into my cut. The bleeding increased dramatically, which the creature interpreted as the ritual working properly. What it didn't realize was that I'd just poisoned the binding. Anticoagulants prevent blood from clotting by interfering with specific proteins. If this creature's power was somehow tied to blood magic, to the life force carried in blood, then contaminating that blood might disrupt its control. It was a desperate gamble based on nothing but intuition and hope. Asterisk. You are mine now, asterisk. The serpent's voice filled my mind. Asterisk. Feel the change beginning. Your old form was weak, limited. Soon, you will be something magnificent. Asterisk. I did feel something changing, but not what the creature expected. My blood was flowing too freely now, carrying the anticoagulant through my system, and wherever it went, I felt the serpent's influence weakening. Something's wrong, I gasped, trying to sound confused rather than triumphant. The great serpent's head snapped up, eyes focusing on me with new intensity. Asterisk. What have you done? Asterisk. I don't know. The blood, it won't stop. Around the church, the smaller snakes began moving agitatedly. The congregation members were looking around in confusion, as if waking from a dream. Mrs. Patterson was the first to speak, her voice hoarse but human again. Rebecca, what's happening? The scales on her face were fading, returning to normal skin. David looked down at his hands in amazement as his fingers shortened back to normal proportions. Asterisk, impossible. Asterisk, the serpent hissed, but its voice was weaker now. Asterisk, the binding cannot be broken. Asterisk, maybe not, I said, pressing my bleeding hand harder against the altar. But it can be poisoned. The creature reared back, and for the first time I saw something like fear in its ancient eyes. My blood was spreading across the altar now, soaking into wood that had absorbed decades of power. And everywhere it touched, I could feel the serpent's control cracking. Asterisk, you do not understand what you are doing. Asterisk, it said desperately. Asterisk, we are necessary. Humanity will destroy this world without our guidance. Asterisk, maybe, I said, feeling my strength starting to fade from blood loss. But that's humanity's choice to make. The great serpent let out a sound like a mountain screaming. Around the church, the smaller snakes began to writhe and dissolve, their forms becoming translucent before disappearing entirely. The creature itself was growing fainter, less solid. Asterisk. This is not over. Asterisk, it warned. Asterisk, others will wake. Others will finish what I began. Asterisk. Then we'll deal with them too. Collins and David caught me as I collapsed, my hand still pressed to the altar. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was the great serpent fading away like smoke, its final words echoing in my mind. Asterisk. Remember, healer, you are still prey. Asterisk. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Roanoke. The official report listed the incident as a biological contamination event, something about the discreetris's biological contamination event. Toxic mold spores causing hallucinations. The church was quarantined and eventually demolished for structural safety concerns. The congregation members all recovered fully, though none of them could recall exactly what had happened. The doctors said it was trauma-induced amnesia, a common response to severe psychological stress. I knew better. I'd used my own blood to break an ancient binding, and the experience had left me changed in ways I was still discovering. I could sense things now that I'd never noticed before. The way animals moved when something supernatural was near. The feeling of old power sleeping in sacred places. 6 months later, I transferred to a desk job in Richmond. Told everyone I was burnt out, needed a change. The truth was, I couldn't handle being in the mountains anymore. Every shadow looked like a snake. Every whisper of wind sounded like voices plotting in languages older than human speech. But sometimes, late at night, I get calls from other rangers, reports of strange animal behavior, religious communities experiencing medical emergencies, places where the wildlife has gone silent and the trees won't grow right. I always tell them the same thing: call the CDC, follow quarantine protocols, and whatever they do, don't go in alone. Because I know the truth now. There are things sleeping under sacred ground all over this country. Ancient things that remember when humans were just another species struggling to survive, and every year, more of them are waking up. The Cherokee knew. They tried to warn us in the only way they could, by binding the threats where they lay and hoping future generations would be wise enough to leave them alone. We weren't. My name is Rebecca Ashford, and I've treated more snake bites than any ranger in Virginia. But the worst bite I ever dealt with wasn't from a snake at all. It was from the truth, and unlike every other wound I've treated, this one never stops bleeding. My name is Marcus Ironbear, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 19 years. I know every trail, every stream, every hidden cave in these mountains. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old days, when our Cherokee people lived here before the soldiers came. She said the mountains had spirits, that they watched over us. I always thought those were just stories. I wish I still believed that. It started in November 1976, near Cataract Falls. The leaves had turned gold and red, and tourists came from all over to see them. But something felt different that year. The animals were acting strange. Bears that should have been getting ready for winter were running away from the mountain instead of finding caves. Birds flew in circles like they were confused. Even my old dog Blue wouldn't walk the trails near the falls anymore. I work out of the ranger station at Cataract Falls. It's a small wooden building where hikers check in before they head up the mountain. The falls are special to my people. There are old Cherokee carvings on the rocks, symbols that my grandfather taught me to read. They tell stories about the mountain, about something sleeping deep underground. The first sign of real trouble came on a Tuesday morning. I was drinking coffee when Dr. Patricia Wells walked into my station. She was a geologist from the university, part of a team studying earthquake activity in the area. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said. Her face was pale. "We found something that doesn't make sense." I poured her some coffee. "What kind of something?" She pulled out a folder full of papers covered in wavy lines and numbers. "We've been measuring seismic activity on this mountain for 6 months. These readings, they look like a heartbeat." I laughed. "Mountains don't have heartbeats, Doc." "I know that, but look at this." She showed me the lines on the paper. They went up and down in a steady rhythm, like watching someone's pulse on a hospital monitor. It's coming from deep underground, maybe 2 miles down. And it's getting faster. I studied the papers. The lines looked exactly like a heartbeat, too exact to be coincidence. Could be underground water moving around, or gas pockets shifting. That's what we thought too. "But Marcus, we've been down in those caves near the falls. We found metal." "So?" "Could be old mining equipment." She shook her head. "This metal is organic. It's grown, not made, like veins in a body, and it goes deeper than our equipment can measure." I felt a chill run down my back. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. "The mountain has a heart, little one, old as the earth itself. We must never wake it up." "There's more, Doctor," Wells continued. "Yesterday, our equipment picked up sounds. Want to hear?" She pulled out a small tape recorder and pressed play. At first, there was just static. Then I heard it. A low, deep sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It sounded like breathing. Huge, slow breathing, like something the size of a mountain taking a breath every few minutes. I turned off the recorder. "How many people know about this?" "Just my team, 3 of us. We're not sure what to do." I looked out the window at the mountain. The trees were swaying, but there wasn't any wind. "I think I need to talk to my uncle. He knows the old stories better than anyone." That afternoon, I drove to the Cherokee Reservation to see Uncle Joseph. He was 83 years old and one of the last people who remembered the stories from before the Trail of Tears, when thousands of our people died walking to Oklahoma in the winter of 1838. Uncle Joseph listened while I told him about the heartbeat and the breathing sounds. His face got more serious with every word. "You should not have told me this," he said finally. "Why not?" "Because now I have to tell you the truth, and the truth is dangerous." He was quiet for a long time, staring at the mountain in the distance. "Our people called it the Earth's heart. We were its guardians, keeping it safe, keeping it asleep. When the soldiers forced us to leave, there was no one left to watch over it." "Uncle, you're talking about the mountain like it's alive." "Not like it's alive, Marcus. It is alive. Older than humans, older than most life on this planet. It's been sleeping for over 100 years, but something is waking it up." I wanted to laugh, but the serious look in his eyes stopped me. "What happens if it wakes up?" Uncle Joseph stood up and walked to his window. "The stories say it will try to protect itself. It doesn't understand the difference between those who heard it and those who don't. To something that old and powerful, all humans might look the same." I drove back to the ranger station as the sun was setting. The mountain looked different somehow, like it was watching me. I kept thinking about Dr. Wells' recordings, about the metal veins growing underground like blood vessels. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard something that made my blood freeze. It was the breathing sound from the tape recorder, but louder, coming through the walls of my cabin. I looked out the window and saw the trees moving up and down, like the whole mountainside was breathing. The mountain was waking up. The next morning, I found Dr. Wells waiting at my station. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "It's getting worse," she said, showing me new papers. "The heartbeat is faster now, and the breathing sounds are louder, but that's not the strangest part." "What is?" "Come with me. I need to show you something." We hiked up the trail toward Cataract Falls. It was a path I'd walked thousands of times, but today it felt different. The air was warmer than it should be for November. The ground under our feet felt soft, like it was moving slightly with each step. "Look at this," Dr. Wells said, stopping near a large oak tree. The tree was growing in a spiral pattern, its trunk twisted like a corkscrew. All around it, other trees were doing the same thing. It was like someone had planted a forest while spinning in circles. "Trees don't grow like this naturally," she said. "This happened in the last few days." We kept walking. The closer we got to the falls, the warmer the air became. My boots felt hot, like the ground underneath was heated. Steam was rising from the creek, even though the water had been cold just a week ago. "There, Doctor." Wells pointed to a section of ground near the Cherokee carvings. "Watch that spot." I stared at the dirt and rocks. At first, nothing happened. Then I saw it. The ground was moving up and down, slowly and steadily, like the earth was breathing. "My equipment shows this is happening all over the mountain, Doctor," Wells said. "The whole thing is moving like it's alive." I knelt down and put my hand on the breathing ground. It was warm, and I could feel a pulse underneath, like a giant heartbeat deep below. The Cherokee carvings on the rocks nearby seemed to glow in the morning light. "We need to get back," I said, standing up quickly. "This isn't safe." As we turned to leave, we heard voices coming up the trail. A group of 3 people was hiking toward us, 2 men in military uniforms and a woman in a business suit. "Are you Marcus Ironbear?" the woman asked. "I'm Agent Sarah Mitchell from the Department of Natural Resources. These are specialists Clark and Rodriguez from the Geological Survey." I didn't believe her for a second. These people had the look of federal agents, not park officials. "What do you want?" "We're investigating unusual seismic activity in this area. We understand you've been working with Dr. Wells here." "Doctor?" Wells stepped closer to me. "I didn't call anyone from the government." Agent Mitchell smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "We have our ways of monitoring scientific research. This mountain contains valuable mineral deposits. We need to run some tests." "No," I said firmly. "This is sacred Cherokee land. You can't just come in here and start digging." "Actually, we can." She pulled out some official-looking papers. "Federal authority supersedes tribal claims when it comes to national security." Specialist Rodriguez was already unpacking equipment from his backpack, drills and measuring devices. "We'll just take a few core samples. Won't hurt anything." I was about to argue when the ground underneath us started shaking. Not like an earthquake, no, more like something huge was turning over underground. The breathing ground near the falls started moving faster. "What the hell?" Specialist Clark muttered, trying to keep his balance. The shaking got stronger. One of the spiral trees near us started creaking and swaying. Then we heard it. Sound like a giant taking a deep breath, coming from everywhere around us. "We need to leave." "Now," I said. Agent Mitchell ignored me and nodded to Rodriguez. "Take the samples. This activity just proves there's something valuable down there." Rodriguez moved toward the breathing ground with his drill. The moment the drill bit touched the earth, everything went wrong. The ground cracked open with a sound like thunder. Steam poured out of the crack, hot enough to burn. Rodriguez stumbled backward, but his foot slipped into the opening. "Help me!" he screamed, trying to pull his leg out. We all rushed toward him, but the crack was getting wider. Clark grabbed Rodriguez's arms and pulled, but his foot seemed to be stuck in something thick, like mud or clay. "It's got me!" Rodriguez yelled. "Something's got my foot." I looked down into the crack. In the dim light, I could see Rodriguez's boot, but it wasn't stuck in mud. The rock itself was wrapped around his ankle like fingers, holding him tight. The stone was moving. Alive, growing up his leg. "Cut off the boot!" I shouted to Clark, but it was too late. The living rock had reached Rodriguez's knee and was moving faster. He screamed as the stone covered more of his leg, turning from flesh to gray rock. His eyes were wide with terror, but he couldn't move anymore. "Rodriguez!" Clark reached down into the crack, trying to grab his partner's hand. "Don't touch him," Dr. Wells warned. "You'll get caught too." We watched in horror as the stone covered Rodriguez's chest, then his neck. His mouth opened to scream, but no sound came out. In less than a minute, he had become part of the mountain, a human-shaped statue sticking out of the crack in the ground. But the worst part was his eyes. They were still moving, still aware. He was alive inside the stone. Agent Mitchell stared at what used to be her specialist. "What kind of place is this?" "The kind of place you should have stayed away from," I said. The crack in the ground was closing up, sealing Rodriguez inside. The breathing was getting louder, angrier. "Doctor?" Wells was packing up her equipment. "We need to evacuate the entire area. Whatever's down there, it doesn't want to be disturbed." "We're not evacuating anything," Agent Mitchell said, but her voice was shaking. "This just proves there's advanced technology down there. Maybe alien, maybe Russian. We need to study it." A low rumble came from underground, so deep I felt it in my bones. The remaining spiral trees started swaying without any wind. In the distance, I could see other cracks opening up all over the mountainside. "It's waking up," I whispered, remembering Uncle Joseph's warning. "The whole mountain is waking up." Agent Mitchell was talking into a radio, calling for backup. Clark was still staring at the spot where Rodriguez had been absorbed. Dr. Wells was gathering her seismic equipment, and somewhere deep underground, something as old as the earth itself was opening its eyes for the first time in over a century. The mountain was no longer sleeping. Over the next 3 days, everything got worse. Agent Mitchell brought in a whole team of military scientists. They set up camp near the falls and started drilling holes all over the mountainside. They wouldn't listen when I told them about Rodriguez, wouldn't believe what Dr. Wells had recorded on her equipment. Specialist Rodriguez had an accident with unstable ground, Mitchell told her superiors. "We need to be more careful, but the mission continues." I tried to get the Cherokee Tribal Council to stop them, but the government had legal papers. They claimed the mining rights belonged to the federal government, not the tribe. All I could do was watch as they brought in bigger drills and more equipment. The mountain didn't like it. On Thursday morning, I found Dr. Williams, one of the new scientists, standing at the edge of the forest. He wasn't moving, just staring at the trees with his mouth open. "Dr. Williams?" I called to him. He turned toward me, but something was wrong with his eyes. They looked distant, like he was seeing something far away. "Do you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" "The mountain is singing." I listened carefully, but all I could hear was the wind in the trees and the sound of drilling equipment. "I don't hear anything." "It's beautiful," he said, walking toward the spiral trees. "It wants me to come closer." I grabbed his arm. "Don't go over there. It's not safe." "Doctor." Williams looked at me like he didn't recognize me. The stone is warm. It wants to share its dreams with us. He pulled away from me and walked toward the nearest drilling site. Before I could stop him, he put his hands flat against the rock wall where the drill had been working. The stone moved like water, flowing up his arms. "Doctor." Williams smiled as it covered his hands, then his wrists. "It's showing me such wonderful things," he said peacefully. "The history of the earth, millions of years of memories." "Fight it!" I yelled, trying to pull him away from the wall. But Dr. Williams wasn't fighting. He was letting the living rock absorb him, pull him into the mountain. "Don't be afraid, Marcus," he said as the stone reached his shoulders. "It doesn't want to hurt us, it just wants us to understand." In 30 seconds, Dr. Williams was gone, absorbed into the rock wall. Like Rodriguez, his eyes were still moving inside the stone, still aware, but now they looked happy instead of terrified. I ran back to the camp to warn the others, but Agent Mitchell wasn't interested in listening. "We've lost 2 people to unstable geological conditions," she said, talking into her radio. "Request immediate backup and heavy drilling equipment. We're close to a major discovery." "You're close to getting everyone killed," I told her. That afternoon, they brought in the heavy equipment, on BT. A drill the size of a truck that could bore deep into the mountain. The plan was to drill down to the source of the seismic activity and find out what was causing the strange readings. "Doctor." Wells found me at the ranger station that evening. "I've been monitoring the mountain's vital signs all day," she said. "The heartbeat is much faster now, and the ground temperature has gone up 15 degrees. "It's getting angry," I said. "Marcus, I think you're right about this thing being alive. My equipment is picking up electrical activity that looks like brainwaves. Something down there is thinking." Uncle Joseph arrived at the station just as Dr. Wells was showing me her latest readings. He looked at the charts and shook his head sadly. "It's trying to defend itself," he said. "In the old stories, when the Earth's heart was threatened, it would reach out and make the attackers part of itself. It doesn't understand that some humans want to help." "How do we make it understand?" I asked. "The old way. With respect and ceremony. But first, we need to stop them from drilling." We were too late. As we talked, we could hear the big drill starting up near the falls. The sound echoed off the mountains like thunder. The response was immediate and terrifying. The ground under the entire camp started shaking, not just moving up and down like breathing, but violent shaking like an earthquake. Tents collapsed, equipment fell over, and people started screaming. But this wasn't a normal earthquake. The shaking was purposeful, controlled. It was strongest near the drilling equipment and gentler near the natural forest. "It's fighting back, Doctor," Wells said, watching her seismic equipment go crazy. Through the darkness, we could see lights moving on the mountainside. 2 Verset. Not electric lights, but a glow coming from inside the rocks themselves. The spiral trees were swaying and bending like they were dancing. Then we heard the roar. It came from deep underground, so loud and powerful that it shook the windows of my station. It was a sound of rage and pain, like a wounded animal crying out. But this animal was the size of a mountain. "Everyone off the mountain," I radioed to the military camp. "Evacuate now," but it was too late for some of them. As the big drill touched the rock, the mountain struck back. The drill site exploded upward in a fountain of hot stone and steam. The drill operator, Sergeant Barnes, disappeared into the eruption. When the steam cleared, we could see him embedded in the new rock formation that had risen from the ground. Like the others, he was still alive inside the stone, but his expression was different, not peaceful like Dr. Williams, not terrified like Rodriguez. He looked angry, like he was fighting the mountain from inside. "That's 6 people," Dr. Wells said quietly. "How many more before they stop?" Agent Mitchell was shouting orders at her remaining team, telling them to set up defensive positions around the reading camp. She still thought this was some kind of attack by enemy forces using unknown technology. But I knew the truth. The mountain wasn't just defending itself anymore. It was at war. And we were in the middle of a battlefield where the ground itself was the enemy. The worst part was knowing that Uncle Joseph was right. The mountain couldn't tell the difference between those who wanted to hurt it and those who wanted to help. To something that ancient and powerful, all humans looked the same. As the night went on, more glowing cracks appeared all over the mountainside. The heartbeat was so fast now that we could feel it through our feet, like standing on top of a giant drum. Whatever lived in the heart of the mountain was fully awake now, and it was angry. By dawn on Friday, the government had brought in tanks. 3 military vehicles rolled up the mountain road, their tracks tearing up the asphalt. General Morrison stepped out of the lead tank wearing combat gear and carrying a briefcase. "We're dealing with an unknown hostile force," he announced to Agent Mitchell. "Could be Russians, could be aliens. Either way, we're going to blast it out of there and study what's left." I tried to explain what was really happening, but the general wouldn't listen. "Son, I've been fighting wars for 30 years. I know an enemy when I see one." Dr. Wells had spent the night analyzing her data. "Marcus, the brainwave patterns are getting more complex. I think it's learning from the people it absorbed. It now knows everything they knew." That was a terrifying thought. The mountain now had the memories and knowledge of 6 different people, including Sergeant Barnes, who knew about military tactics and weapons. Uncle Joseph arrived with 3 other Cherokee elders. "We need to try the old ceremonies," he said. "If we can communicate with it, maybe we can stop this before more people die." "How do we talk to a mountain?" I asked. "The same way our ancestors did, with respect, with sacred smoke, with the old words." The elders began preparing for a ceremony near the Cherokee carvings by the falls. They lit sage and sweetgrass, creating smoke that rose straight up in the still air. Uncle Joseph began chanting in Cherokee, words that had been passed down for hundreds of years. At first, nothing happened. Then the ground under our feet stopped shaking. The angry rumbling from deep underground got quieter. Even the military equipment seemed to run more quietly. "It's listening," Uncle Joseph whispered. The rock wall near the carvings began to change. The stone flowed like water, forming new shapes. Slowly, a face appeared in the rock. Not human, but ancient and powerful, with eyes like deep caves. When the face spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once, like the mountain itself was talking. "Who disturbs the long sleep?" Uncle Joseph stepped forward. "We are the Cherokee. The people who once guarded your rest, we have returned. The metal teeth bite deep. The firemakers seek my heart. I must defend. I found my voice. We understand. But not all humans want to hurt you. Some of us want to protect you." The stone face turned toward me. "You speak truth. But the destroyers bring weapons. They would cut out my heart and study its secrets." Behind us, General Morrison was preparing his tanks to fire on the rock face. "Whatever that thing is, we're going to blast it into pieces and ship the remains to our labs." "Wait," I called out. "It's trying to communicate." But the general wasn't interested in communication. "Fire," he ordered. The tank shells hit the rock face with tremendous explosions. Smoke and dust filled the air. When it cleared, the stone face was gone, blasted away. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the mountain screamed. The sound came from everywhere, from the rocks, from the trees, from the ground itself. It was a cry of pain and rage that made everyone cover their ears. Birds fell dead from the sky. Windows shattered in my ranger station half a mile away. The mountain began to fight back with everything it had. Cracks opened in the ground under the tanks, swallowing them whole. Trees bent down like giant hands, grabbing soldiers and lifting them into the air. The stone itself came alive, reaching out to catch anyone wearing military uniforms. General Morrison found himself face to face with a wall of living rock. "What the hell is this thing?" he shouted, drawing his pistol. "It's the earth itself," I told him. "And you just declared war on it." The rock wall flowed forward, surrounding the general. But instead of absorbing him quickly like the others, it held him in place. The stone face reappeared, looking directly at Morrison. "You bring weapons to a sacred place. You seek to steal the heart of the world. For this, you will become part of what you would destroy." "I'm a United States general," Morrison yelled. "You can't do this. I am older than your species. I am the foundation upon which your civilizations are built, and I am tired of being torn apart for your profit." The stone flowed over General Morrison slowly, deliberately. As it covered him, his knowledge of military strategy and weapons became part of the mountain's consciousness. Now it knew how to fight human armies. Uncle Joseph stepped forward again. "Great Spirit of the mountain, we offer ourselves as guardians once more. Let us help you find peace." The stone face looked at him with ancient, sad eyes. The peaceful ones are few. The destroyers are many. They will come with bigger weapons, seeking vengeance for their fallen. Then let us help you protect yourself, I said. Not through war, but through law. Through treaties and agreements. How can words on paper protect against those who seek my heart? Doctor. Wells stepped forward with her equipment. Because now the world knows you exist. My recordings, my measurements, they prove you're a living being. And living beings have rights. The mountain considered this. You would speak for me to your kind? Yes, I said. I'm a Cherokee Ranger. I know both worlds, the traditional ways and the modern laws. Let me be your voice in the human world. There is danger in this. To speak for me, you must understand me. To understand me, you must become part of me. I looked at Uncle Joseph, who nodded solemnly. I thought about Rodriguez and the others, trapped but still aware inside the living stone. Then I thought about what would happen if more armies came to tear apart the mountain. I accept, I said. The rock face smiled sadly. Then come, guardian. Let us share our dreams. I walked forward and placed my hands on the warm stone wall. The mountain's consciousness flowed into me like water, and I felt my awareness expand beyond my human body. Suddenly, I could feel the entire mountain, every tree, every stream, every living thing connected to the ancient heart deep underground. But I was still me. Still Marcus Ironbear, still human, just bigger now. I could feel the mountain's pain from a century of mining and drilling, its loneliness since the Cherokee had been forced to leave, its fear of the machines that wanted to cut out its heart. And I could feel its hope that maybe, finally, someone understood. I opened my eyes and found myself standing in two places at once. My human body was still by the Cherokee carvings, talking to Uncle Joseph and Dr. Wells. But I was also part of the mountain itself, feeling the flow of underground streams and the slow growth of ancient trees. How do you feel? Dr. Wells asked, watching me carefully. Different, I said. My voice sounded normal, but I could feel the mountain's presence in my words. I'm still me, but I'm more now. I can feel everything that lives on this mountain. Agent Mitchell was talking, frantically into her radio, calling for backup and reinforcements. We need tactical nuclear weapons, she was saying. This thing is too dangerous to leave alive. I turned toward her, and when I spoke, my voice carried the weight of the mountain itself. No more weapons, no more drilling, no more attempts to take what doesn't belong to you. You can't stop the United States military, Mitchell said, backing away from me. I don't have to stop them, I replied. The mountain will defend itself. But now it has someone who understands both worlds. Someone who can find a better way. Over the next few weeks, everything changed. Dr. Wells' recordings and measurements proved to the scientific world that the mountain was a living organism. Environmental lawyers filed lawsuits to protect it under endangered species laws. The Cherokee Nation claimed sovereign territory rights over the entire mountain range. Most importantly, the mountain agreed to release Rodriguez, Dr. Williams, Sergeant Barnes, and the others, everyone except General Morrison, who had tried to destroy it with weapons. They came out of the stone changed, carrying part of the mountain's consciousness with them, but free to live their own lives. The government tried to fight the legal challenges, but public opinion was against them. People around the world were fascinated by the idea of a living mountain. Environmentalists called it proof that the earth itself was fighting back against human destruction. Other sacred sites began showing similar signs of awakening. Mountains in Tibet, ancient forests in South America, even some islands in the Pacific started exhibiting signs of geological consciousness. The mountain in North Carolina wasn't alone. It was part of something much bigger. I became the official liaison between the mountain and the human world. Living with one foot in each reality wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I could feel when the mountain was happy, when tourists showed proper respect for the sacred places. I could also feel its anger when people tried to damage or pollute the area. The military never came back. Word spread quickly through government circles that the mountain had absorbed a general's knowledge of warfare and could defend itself against any conventional attack. The official report listed it as a geological anomaly requiring further peaceful study. 6 months later, I was sitting in my ranger station when a group of Cherokee children came to visit with their teacher. They wanted to hear about the mountain's awakening, about how their ancestors had been its guardians. "Is it really alive?" asked a little girl named Sarah. I smiled and placed my hand on the ground. Through my connection to the mountain, I could feel its amusement at the question. The ground under the building gave a gentle pulse, like a friendly heartbeat. "Very much alive," I said. "And it's been waiting a long time for its people to come home." The children laughed with delight as the mountain pulsed again, welcoming them. Uncle Joseph joined us on the porch, looking out at the spiral trees and the peaceful forest. "The old stories were true after all," he said. "All of them?" He nodded thoughtfully. "The stories say that when the earth awakens, it means the time of great change is coming. Humans will have to choose, learn to live in harmony with the world, or face its anger." I felt the mountain's agreement through our connection. Around the world, other ancient places were stirring to life. The earth itself was becoming conscious, and it was running out of patience with humanity's destructive ways. "What do you think will happen?" I asked. Uncle Joseph watched the children playing safely in the shadow of the living mountain. "I think the earth is giving us one last chance to prove we can be good guardians instead of destroyers." The mountain pulsed gently under our feet, like a sleeping giant turning over in its dreams. But it wasn't sleeping anymore. It was watching, waiting, and hoping that humanity would make the right choice. As the sun set over the Great Smoky Mountains, I felt the ancient heartbeat deep underground, steady and strong. The mountain was no longer alone in its long vigil. And neither was I. The age of sleeping mountains was over. The age of guardians had begun again. My name is David Coleridge, and I've spent 14 years sealing dangerous mine shafts in the Allegheny National Forest. I never believed the voices echoing from sealed tunnels belonged to anything living. People always look surprised when they learn my family history. My grandfather was a coal miner, and his father before him. 3 generations of Coleridge men crawling through dark tunnels, breathing coal dust, and coming home black as night. But I broke that chain. After high school, I studied engineering and became a park ranger. My job is to keep people safe from the hundreds of abandoned mine shafts that dot these Pennsylvania hills like dangerous scars. The mines around Kinzua Creek are the worst. They've been abandoned since the 1942, but the tunnels run for miles underground. Some are flooded, some filled with poisonous gas, and others ready to collapse at any moment. I've sealed dozens of them over the years, welding steel plates over entrances, filling shafts with concrete, putting up warning signs. It's dangerous work, but someone has to do it. The locals don't like to talk about the mines. The older folks, especially the families whose grandfathers worked underground, they get quiet when you mention them. They'll mutter something about debts still owed or promises to keep, then change the subject. I always figured it was just old grief. Mining was hard, dangerous work, and a lot of good men died doing it. I learned about the big disaster when I was a kid. In 1943, there was a massive cave-in at the main shaft. 89 miners went down that day, and none came back up. The rescue crews tried for weeks, but the tunnels had collapsed completely. They never found the bodies. The mining company sealed everything up and left town. My grandfather was the foreman that day. The guilt ate him alive, and he killed himself 2 years later. That's why I became a ranger. I wanted to protect people from those deadly holes in the ground. I wanted to make sure no one else would die because of the mines. For 14 years, I did my job without any real problems. Sure, there were strange sounds sometimes. Wind whistling through old shafts, timbers creaking as they settled. The locals claimed they heard voices, but I knew better. Physics, not phantoms. Sound travels in weird ways underground. Mix that with wind and settling wood, and your brain can play tricks on you. Then Dr. Amanda Rivers called me. Dr. Rivers was a speleologist, cave scientist, from Penn State. She wanted permission to map the underground passages for research. She said her team had new equipment that could safely explore the old mine system and create detailed maps. It would help us understand which areas were most dangerous and needed better sealing. I should have said no. Every instinct told me to refuse. But the state was pushing for better documentation of the mine hazards, and Dr. Rivers had all the right permits and safety equipment. Her team included experienced cave explorers and mining engineers. On paper, it looked like a smart idea. The night before they arrived, I drove out to the main entrance where my grandfather's crew had entered for the last time. Someone had removed my steel plate. The opening was clear, and I could see down into the darkness. I'd sealed that entrance myself just 3 months earlier. The steel plate was lying nearby, but the bolts hadn't been cut or broken. They'd been carefully removed from the inside. I told myself it was vandals, kids looking for adventure, maybe treasure hunters. But as I stood there in the fading daylight, I heard something that made my blood cold. Voices. Clear human voices speaking from somewhere deep in the mine. They were too far away to understand the words, but I could hear the rhythm of conversation, like workers talking during their shift. I grabbed my flashlight and started toward the opening, then stopped. The voices had stopped too. The silence felt thick and heavy, like the mine was holding its breath, waiting. I sealed the entrance again that night, using twice as many bolts as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was down there didn't want to stay buried. Dr. Rivers and her team arrived the next morning. Dr. Rivers was a small, energetic woman in her 40s, with graying hair and bright eyes that missed nothing. Her team included Professor Martinez, an older man who specialized in mining history, Tommy Chen, a graduate student with cave rescue training, and Eleanor Price, a local historian who knew more about the mines than anyone. The official records don't match what we're seeing, Dr. Rivers explained as we stood at the sealed entrance. According to the mining company, this system only goes down about 200 feet and runs maybe half a mile. But our ground-penetrating radar shows tunnels going much deeper and extending for miles in every direction. I showed them where I'd found the steel plate. Professor Martinez examined the bolts carefully. These weren't cut, he said. They were unscrewed from the inside. But that's impossible. The mine's been sealed for 40 years. Eleanor Price was quiet, staring into the dark opening with a worried expression. My great-uncle worked here, she finally said. He always claimed the mines were wrong somehow. Said they went places that weren't on any map, connected to things that weren't natural. The company told the workers to ignore certain tunnels, never to explore them. Tommy laughed. Come on, Eleanor. You don't believe in haunted mines, do you? Eleanor didn't answer, but I saw her shiver despite the warm morning. We entered the mine at 10 a.m. I went first, followed by Dr. Rivers, then the others. The main tunnel was exactly as I remembered. Rough walls carved from rock and clay, rotting wooden supports, and the musty smell of dampness and decay. Our lights cut through the darkness, showing about 20 feet ahead. The first strange thing happened within minutes. Tommy was checking his watch when he stopped suddenly. That's weird, he said. My watch is running backwards. We all checked our timepieces. Every single one was running in reverse, the second hands ticking counterclockwise. Professor Martinez pulled out a compass, then swore. The needle wasn't pointing north, it was pointing deeper into the mine. Equipment malfunction, Doctor, Rivers said. But her voice was uncertain. The minerals in the rock might be affecting our instruments. We continued down the main tunnel for about 300 feet before reaching the first side passage. According to the old maps, it should have been a dead end after 50 feet, but our lights showed it continuing much farther than that. Let's split up, Doctor, Rivers suggested. Tommy and Eleanor can map the side passage while the rest of us continue on the main route. I should have insisted we stay together. But the tunnel looked stable, and they had radios. What could go wrong? Tommy and Eleanor disappeared into the side passage while the rest of us kept going. For 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. We found old mining equipment, pickaxes, shovels, rail tracks for the ore carts. The gear was rusted and worn, exactly what you'd expect after 40 years. Then Professor Martinez made a discovery that changed everything. David, he called from about 50 feet ahead. You need to see this. I hurried to where he stood, shining his light on a section of wall. There were pickaxe marks in the rock, fresh ones. The stone chips at the bottom were clean and new, not covered with 40 years of dust. Someone had been mining here recently. That's impossible, I said. This tunnel has been sealed since 1943. Doctor. Rivers examined the marks closely. These were made within the last few days, maybe even yesterday. She picked up a piece of freshly broken stone. David, someone is still working these. Mines. Before I could respond, Tommy's voice crackled over the radio. But the words made no sense. Base camp, this is Tommy. We've reached the coal face. Starting the night shift now. Production quota is 200 tons. Over. Tommy? Dr. Rivers called into her radio. Tommy, respond. What's your actual location? Static answered her. Then another voice came through. Eleanor's, but strange and distant. Foreman says we're behind schedule. Got to work faster. The war effort depends on us. Coal keeps the factories running. Coal wins the war. Dr. Rivers and I looked at each other. World War II had ended in 1945. Eleanor was born in 1960. Tommy, Eleanor, returned to the main tunnel immediately. I ordered into my radio. The only response was the sound of pickaxes hitting stone, coming through the static. Rhythmic, steady, like a work crew in full swing. We ran toward the side passage, but when we reached it, there was nothing there. The tunnel was empty. No Tommy, no Eleanor, no fresh mining marks. Just old, undisturbed stone and 40-year-old dust. Where are they? Dr. Rivers whispered. That's when we heard the voices. Not from the radio this time, but echoing from deeper in the mine. Dozens of voices, all talking at once. Work songs, conversations, someone calling out orders. It sounded like a busy mine in full operation, but we were alone in a dead mine that had been abandoned for 40 years. Professor Martinez grabbed my arm. David, we need to leave. Now. As we turned to go back, our lights caught something that stopped us cold. Fresh footprints in the dust, leading deeper into the mine. Not just Tommy and Eleanor's boots, but dozens of different prints. Work boots, the kind miners wore in the 1,940 seconds, and the prints were glowing with a soft, cold light that had nothing to do with our flashlights. The voices were getting louder, coming closer, and mixed in with the work songs and conversations, I heard something that made my heart pound with terror. My grandfather's voice, calling my name from somewhere in the darkness ahead. David? David Coleridge? Is that you, boy? My grandfather's voice echoed from the tunnels ahead, clear as if he were standing right beside me. But he'd been dead for 38 years. Professor Martinez grabbed my shoulder. We're leaving, right now. But Dr. Rivers was already walking toward the sound, her light cutting through the darkness. This is incredible. We're recording acoustic phenomena that could revolutionize our understanding of. She stopped talking because her light had found something impossible. About 100 feet ahead, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. And that chamber was full of people. Miners in old-fashioned work clothes, carrying pickaxes and shovels, pushing coal-filled carts along rusty rails. They moved with purpose, like they were working an active shift. But they were all translucent, glowing with that same cold light we'd seen in the footprints. Jesus Christ, Professor Martinez whispered. The ghost miners seemed unaware of us at first. They continued their work, loading coal that appeared solid but flickered like candle flame. Some were singing work songs I remembered from my grandfather's records. Others called out to each other in languages I didn't recognize. Polish, Italian, German. The languages of the immigrant workers who'd built these mines. Then one of them looked up and saw us. He was tall and thin, wearing a foreman's cap and carrying a clipboard that glowed like everything else down here. When he spotted us, his face broke into a smile that was somehow worse than any scream. David Coleridge, he said, and his voice carried perfectly across the distance. I've been waiting for you, boy. We've got work to do. I knew that face. I'd seen it in old family photographs. It was my grandfather, Thomas Coleridge, looking exactly as he had in 1943. Run, I told the 24. Others, run now. But when we turned, the tunnel behind us had changed. The walls were closer together, and the ceiling was lower. Support timbers that hadn't been there before now blocked parts of the passage. We were trapped. Dr. Rivers was still trying to be scientific. The atmospheric pressure down here, combined with possible gas leaks, could be causing mass hallucinations. Her explanation cut off abruptly when one of the ghost miners walked right through the stone wall beside her. He looked solid now, real, covered in coal dust, and wearing clothes that looked brand new despite being 40 years old. Ma'am, he said politely, tipping his helmet. You shouldn't be down here without proper equipment. Safety first. That's what the foreman always says. He looked at her modern clothes and equipment with confusion. "What mine you folks from? Ain't seen gear like that before." "What year do you think it is?" Professor Martinez asked. The ghost miner smiled. "Why, 1943, of course. March 15th to be exact. Got to keep the coal flowing. War's not going to win itself." More miners were emerging from the walls now, all of them looking solid and real. They surrounded us with friendly curiosity, but something in their eyes was wrong. They were too bright, too eager, like they'd been waiting decades for visitors. "You folks hear about the job openings?" asked another miner. "We're always short-handed. Good work, steady pay, and you're helping the war effort." "We need to go," I said firmly. "We don't belong here." My grandfather's ghost stepped forward. Behind him, I could see the chamber was filling with more miners. Dozens of them, all looking at us with that same bright, eager expression. "Now, David," he said in the voice I remembered from childhood, "you can't leave yet. We've got quotas to meet. The company's depending on us, and besides," his smile faded, "you've got family obligations to fulfill." "What obligations?" "The same ones I had. The same ones my father had. A coal ridge has to watch over this mine, David. Has to make sure the work never stops." His expression became sad. "I tried to break the contract once. Tried to warn the other miners about what was really down here. Look how that turned out." Around us, the ghost miners were beginning to look less friendly. Their faces were getting harder, their eyes more demanding. "I made a deal," my grandfather continued. "Promised the mine spirits that the work would continue. Promised them a coal ridge would always be here to supervise. That's why the family has to keep coming back. That's why you're here now." Dr. Rivers suddenly gasped and doubled over. When she straightened up, her face was different. Older, more weathered. Coal dust streaked her cheeks, and her modern clothes had been replaced by 1940 seconds work gear. "Amanda?" Professor Martinez reached for her. She looked at him with eyes that weren't quite her own anymore. "I'm sorry, I can't remember that name. I'm Mary now. Mary Kowalski. Been working this mine for 3 months. Good job, steady pay." She picked up a pickaxe that materialized in her hands. "Gotta get back to work. Foreman says we're behind quota." She walked toward the working area where the other ghost miners were digging. Professor Martinez tried to follow her, but 2 miners blocked his way. "She's one of us now," my grandfather explained. "That's how it works. Touch the tools, and you become part of the crew. Forever." Professor Martinez backed away from the miners, but there was nowhere to go. The tunnel behind us was shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller. Soon we'd have to move forward, toward the working area, where pickaxes and shovels lay scattered on the ground. "David," Professor Martinez whispered. "What do they want?" Before I could answer, a terrible scream echoed through the tunnels. It was Tommy's voice, high and terrified, but it seemed to come from everywhere at half. Once. My grandfather's expression became sad. "That would be the cave-in," he said. "Happens every day at 3:17 p.m. Poor boy was in the wrong place when the ceiling came down. Don't worry, though. He'll be back to work tomorrow. Everyone always comes back to work." The scream came again, and this time I could hear other voices with it. Dozens of men crying out as tons of rock crushed them. But instead of ending, the screams just faded and started over again, like a recording on an endless loop. "How do we leave?" I demanded. My grandfather looked genuinely confused. "Leave? Why would you want to leave? This is good work, David. Important work. Coal powers the world. Coal wins wars. Coal keeps the lights on." His face hardened, and a promise is a promise. The Coleridge family has debts to pay. The tunnel behind us finally closed completely. Professor Martinez and I were forced to step into the main chamber, where dozens of ghost miners watched us with hungry eyes. Pickaxes and shovels lay everywhere, just waiting for us to pick them up. I heard Dr. Rivers, or Mary, or whoever she was now, singing a Polish work song as she swung her pickaxe against the stone wall. Coal poured from the impact point, black and gleaming, though I knew the seam had been played out decades ago. "Take up your tools," my grandfather said gently. "It's time to get to work." I stared at the pickaxe lying at my feet. The handle was worn smooth by countless hands, and it seemed to pulse with its own dark energy. Beside me, Professor Martinez was breathing hard, his eyes fixed on the shovel near his boots. "Don't touch anything," I whispered to him. But the ghost miners were closing in around us. Their friendly expressions had turned, demanding, insistent. The air grew thick and hard to breathe, like the mine itself was pressing down on us. "David," my grandfather said, his voice carrying a note of warning, "you're being difficult. Just like your daddy was when his time came." "My father never worked these mines," I said. "Oh, but he did." My grandfather's smile was terrible. "Every Coleridge man comes down here eventually. Your daddy held out for years, but the mine always calls its own home. Had a wife and young son to think about, you see. Couldn't risk them getting hurt." The truth hit me like a physical blow. My father hadn't died in a car accident when I was 12. He'd come down here, into these tunnels, and never left. "Where is he?" I demanded. My grandfather pointed to one of the miners working nearby. The man looked up at the sound of his name, and I saw my father's face, unchanged from the day he'd supposedly died. He waved cheerfully and went back to his digging. "He's been waiting for you to join him," my grandfather said. "Families should work together." Professor Martinez suddenly bent down and grabbed the shovel. I lunged to stop him, but it was too late. The moment his fingers touched the handle, his face went blank. Years seemed to melt away from him, and his clothes shifted into mining gear. "Pedro Martinez," he said in a strange, formal voice. "Reporting for duty, sir. What's my assignment?" "Tunnel C needs reinforcement," my grandfather told him. "Take your crew and shore up those supports." Professor Martinez nodded and walked away, moving with the mechanical precision of the other ghost miners. In seconds, he was lost among the crowd of workers. I was alone now, surrounded by dozens of dead miners, all waiting for me to pick up that pickaxe. "This can't be real," I said. "People don't just disappear. There are laws, investigations, families looking for them." "Oh, it's real enough," my grandfather replied. "And people disappear all the time in mining country. Cave-ins, gas explosions, equipment failures. Easy to explain away. The mine protects itself." "Why?" I asked. "Why does it need workers?" The coal seam played out decades ago. For the first time, the grandfather looked uncertain. That's not for us to question. The mine wants what it wants. Our job is to keep digging, keep the operation running. It's always been that way." But I was beginning to understand. The miners weren't mining coal at all. They were digging something else, something that had been buried here long before the first white settlers arrived. I remembered Eleanor's research about the Cherokee burial ground, about sacred underground chambers that should never have been disturbed. "You're not mining coal," I realized. "You're digging deeper, looking for something that was buried here on purpose." The ghost miners around me stopped working. The entire chamber fell silent, except for the distant sound of pickaxes, always pickaxes, coming from deeper in the tunnels. "Don't ask questions," my grandfather said quickly. "Just do the work. That's all any of us can do." But I could see fear in his eyes now. For the first time since I'd entered this nightmare, one of the ghost miners looked genuinely afraid. "What happens if you stop working?" I pressed. "We can't stop. The contract." "What contract? Who did you make a deal with?" Before he could answer, the temperature in the mine dropped 20 degrees. Our breath became visible in the suddenly frigid air, and the lights from the ghost miners began to dim. Something was coming up from the deeper tunnels, something that made even the dead miners step back in terror. It rose from the depths like a black tide. Not quite solid, not quite shadow, but definitely alive and definitely angry. When it spoke, its voice came from the stone walls themselves. "Enough questions. Back to work." The miners scattered like frightened children, grabbing their tools and attacking the walls with desperate intensity. But the thing's attention was focused on me. "Coleridge, your family owes a debt. The sacred places were disturbed. The ancient guardians were awakened. Compensation must be paid." I understood now. The mining company hadn't just dug for coal. They'd broken into something much older, something that was supposed to stay buried. The Cherokee had sealed it away for good reasons, but greed had opened doors that should never have been opened. "What do you want?" I asked. "Workers. Always workers. To dig deeper. To free what should not be freed." "And if I refuse?" The thing laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Then everyone you love dies. Your coworkers, your friends, the families of these foolish scientists. One by one, until you submit. It was a trap that had been 40 years in the making. My grandfather had made the deal to protect his workers during the war, but he'd only delayed the inevitable. The thing wanted to dig deeper, to unearth whatever the Cherokee had buried centuries ago, and it needed human hands to do the work. There has to be another way, I said. There is. The thing's voice became almost gentle. Become the foreman, take your grandfather's place. Manage the operation. Keep the workers productive. And in return, no one else has to die. I looked around the chamber at all the ghost miners, my grandfather, my father, Dr. Rivers, Professor Martinez, Tommy somewhere in the deeper tunnels, all trapped here forever, digging towards something that should stay buried. But if I took the job, if I became the supernatural foreman, maybe I could find a way to stop this. Maybe I could protect the living world from whatever lay in the depths. I reached for the pickaxe. The moment my fingers touched the handle, everything changed. The world shifted around me like smoke. Suddenly I was standing in two places at once, the ghost mine of 1943 and the real tunnels of 1983. I could see both versions overlapping, the living world and the dead one existing in the same space. As the new foreman, I understood things that had been hidden before. The thing in the depths wasn't evil, exactly. It was just very, very old and completely alien to human thinking. It had been sleeping peacefully until the mining company broke into its resting place in 1892. Now it was awake and angry, and it wouldn't rest until it was either freed or appeased. The Cherokee had known about it. They'd called it the coal heart, the hungry thing that lived in the deep places. Their shamans had bound it with sacred ceremonies and warnings passed down through generations. But white miners had ignored the warnings, broken the seals, and woken something that should have slept forever. My grandfather had made his deal in desperation. The thing was going to kill every miner in the area, starting with his own crew. The only way to stop it was to give it what it wanted, deed. Workers to help it dig free. But he'd been clever about the contract. Instead of allowing it to take living people, he'd bound their spirits after death. The ghost miners weren't slaves. They were a prison guard, keeping the coal heart distracted with busy work while making sure it never actually reached the surface. Now that job was mine. As foreman, I could move between the ghost mine and the real world. I led the rescue teams to where Tommy, Eleanor, Dr. Rivers, and Professor Martinez were trapped in sealed chambers, unconscious but alive. To the outside world, it looked like they'd been overcome by gas and suffered hallucinations. The official report blamed equipment failure and dangerous atmospheric conditions. The mine was permanently sealed after that. I made sure of it, pouring concrete deep into every shaft and passage I could find. The area was declared geologically unstable and off-limits to the public. Most people believed the official story. But I still go down there every day. In the living world, I'm just David Coleridge, the ranger who had a close call in an old mine. I file my reports, maintain the safety barriers, and warn people away from dangerous areas. Nobody suspects that I spend half my time in 1943 managing a crew of ghost miners who are all that stands between our world and something much worse. The work continues. It has to. Every day, the ghost miners dig new tunnels that lead nowhere, extract coal that vanishes as soon as it's loaded, and follow orders that keep them busy and distracted. And every day, I make sure they never dig in the direction the coal heart actually wants them to go. It's not a perfect solution. The ghost miners know they're trapped, know they'll never rest, but they also understand what they're protecting. My grandfather was proud when I figured out the truth. My father just smiled and went back to work. Sometimes new people stumble into the mine system, urban explorers, researchers, treasure hunters. When that happens, I make sure they find their way out safely. I've gotten good at redirecting them, making sure they only see empty tunnels and old equipment. The ghost mine exists in a different layer of reality now, invisible unless you know exactly how to look. The coal heart still whispers from the depths, promising freedom if I'll just let the miners dig a little deeper, a little further. It's patient. It's been waiting for over a century, and it can wait longer. But as long as there's a coal ridge watching over these tunnels, it will stay buried. My nephew graduated from college last year. He's studying engineering, just like I did. He doesn't know about the family business yet, but someday I'll have to tell him. The contract requires a coal ridge to always be on hand, and I won't live forever. Until then, I keep working both sides of the divide. Ranger by day, supernatural foreman by night. Protecting the living world from something it doesn't know exists. The voices in the mines aren't just wind and settling timber. They're the sound of good people doing necessary work, keeping ancient horrors buried where they belong. And as long as I'm around, that's exactly how it's going to stay. Sometimes, late at night when I'm filing reports in my ranger station, I can hear them singing work songs in the distance. The sound carries up through sealed shafts and concrete barriers, faint but unmistakable. It's oddly comforting. It means the system is working, the guards are at their posts, and the world above ground can sleep safely. But I never sing along. That would mean I'm forgetting which side of reality I belong to. And that's a mistake I can't afford to make.